Have you ever noticed something strange? You can spend hours thinking about learning a new skill, going to the gym, starting a business, or even cleaning your room. You know exactly what you need to do, and deep down, you genuinely want to do it. But the moment it's time to take the very first step, it suddenly feels incredibly difficult. You tell yourself, I'll start tomorrow, and tomorrow turns into next week. If this happens to you, it doesn't mean you're lazy. It means your brain is working exactly as it was designed to. And today, we're going to discover why the first step always feels like the hardest one. One of the biggest reasons is something psychologists call status quo bias. Your brain loves familiar routines because they're predictable and require very little mental effort. Every new action introduces uncertainty, and uncertainty has always meant potential danger throughout human evolution. Whether you're about to start exercising, study for an exam, or launch a new project, your brain sees it as leaving the safety of the known. So it quietly encourages you to stay exactly where you are, even if your current situation isn't making you happy. Another hidden force is known as loss aversion. Surprisingly, your brain fears losing comfort more than it values future rewards. Starting something new often means giving up your free time, your energy, or the comfort of relaxing. Even if the future payoff is enormous, your emotional brain focuses on what you're sacrificing right now. That's why watching one more episode or scrolling social media feels more appealing than taking the first step toward a long-term goal. There's also the action threshold. Every task has an invisible amount of mental energy required just to begin. The beginning is always the most expensive part because your brain has to switch attention, organize information, and overcome resistance. Once you've already started, however, the required energy drops dramatically. This is why opening a textbook feels difficult, but studying for 30 minutes afterward often feels surprisingly manageable. Psychologists also describe something called the Zeigarnik effect. Interestingly, your brain dislikes unfinished tasks. Once you've actually begun, even if you've only worked for 5 minutes, your mind keeps reminding you to continue until the task is complete. Before you start, there is no mental momentum. After you start, your brain begins pulling you forward instead of holding you back. Ironically, the hardest moment is the one just before taking action. Another reason comes from neuroscience and involves your brain's dopamine system. Most people think dopamine is the chemical of pleasure, but it's actually more closely related to anticipation and motivation. Before your brain expects a reward, dopamine levels can be relatively low, making it difficult to initiate action. As soon as you make progress, even something as simple as writing one sentence or putting on your workout shoes, your brain starts releasing more dopamine, making it easier to keep going. Motivation often follows action, not the other way around. There's also a psychological phenomenon called decision fatigue. Throughout the day, every choice you make uses a small amount of mental energy. By the time you finally decide to start working on your goal, your brain is already tired from making dozens or even hundreds of decisions. That's why successful people often reduce unnecessary choices by creating routines. When the decision is already made, starting requires much less mental effort. Perhaps the biggest mistake people make is waiting to feel ready, but readiness is often an illusion. Your brain wants certainty before taking action, yet certainty usually comes after experience, not before it. Confidence isn't built by thinking about doing something. It grows from repeatedly taking small actions. Every tiny first step teaches your brain that the task isn't dangerous, and with each repetition, the resistance becomes weaker until starting feels almost automatic. The next time you struggle to begin something important, don't assume you're lazy or lacking discipline. Your brain is simply trying to protect your energy, avoid uncertainty, and stay inside familiar patterns. The solution isn't forcing yourself through hours of work. Instead, make the first step almost ridiculously small. Open the document, read one page, put on your running shoes, work for just 2 minutes. Once you've crossed the invisible barrier of starting, your brain shifts from resisting action to supporting it. And that's the secret most productive people eventually discover. Success doesn't come from making huge leaps. It comes from making the first small step easy enough that your brain can't find a reason to say no.